Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. My name is Desirae Manzanares, and I'm with the El Paso Hispanic Chamber, and we're happy today to bring you a fireside chat with Representative Lina Ortega. Representative Ortega, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you for inviting me to be here and to talk to you. So I'm looking forward to our chat.
Yes, me as well. And again, as a reminder to our viewers, this is a Facebook Live chat, so you are able to ask Representative Ortega questions in real time. So please feel free to type in your questions and we can go ahead and ask her. So Representative Ortega, let's just start off with your past year in the Texas House of Representatives. You had quite a year.
Oh, I think we all did. It was a very unusual session, besides the fact that we were still dealing with a pandemic. There was so much to be done, and it was an extremely partisan legislative session. It was my third session. I was elected in 2016 and sworn in 2017. So this was my third session at the state capitol. And because of the way elections had gone the year before, we had a new speaker of the House. This is the third speaker that I have served under, and it was a man from Beaumont, Texas, Dave Phelan. He was elected at the beginning of the session. And it was, when you get a new speaker, you get new leadership type of appointments. And so he was able to name new chairs to very influential committees on the House side. And so that meant that we were going to have a very, very different session from the prior session. In terms of the makeup of the House, it pretty much stayed even in terms of Republicans and Democrats, but really the change came with new leadership.
Yeah, and I think that in the special session, you saw kind of that partisanship that you had mentioned. Some of the most severe bills that the nation has ever seen were passed during this particular session. Is there anything that was passed that really struck you as purely partisan, that really doesn't have the best outlook for Texans?
I guess it depends in terms of, where you stand politically on whether you've got the viewpoint that it wasn't the best for Texas, but it was a long year. I mean, we spent a lot of time at the Capitol, literally, because of the fact that at the end of May, there was 3 special sessions that were called by the governor. And the first special session, as we all know, there was quorum. There was never enough members present to actually have a quorum. So even though there were some members, Republican members, and a few Democratic members that were showing up, majority of Democrats were actually in Washington, D.C. And going back to your initial question, we had actually broke quorum at the end of the regular session because of the attempt at that time to pass a very restrictive voting rights bill. So that bill that the governor wanted was not passed, and that was why we were called back for the first special session. When they did not make quorum, we were in DC. We were there advocating to have Congress pass a national voting rights bill. And it was a very unusual process, actually, for so many members of the state house to be there in DC, something that was completely unprecedented. And we were there for a long time. When we returned, we had been successful in actually having the U.S. House of Representatives pass one major voting rights bill, the John Lewis Act, but the Senate had yet at that point not considered it. I think we all know now that President Biden for the last week has been advocating change in the filibuster rule on the Senate side in order for the Senate to consider the proposed voting rights bill. My understanding is it's going to be in the House first. Once it passes the House, it's a little different than the one they had previously passed. It's going up to the Senate. We're really hopeful, obviously, in this state to get that passed because, as most people know, Texas has one of the worst currently voting rights law. And I can get into specifics if you'd like me to, but I will now stop and see what else you'd like to talk to me about, but I can go back to the voting rights bill.
Well, and that's what that was my first question for you, was I know that you were one of the representatives who left Texas during the special session, as you had said, to go up to DC. And that didn't seem to sit well with Governor Abbott. And I know that you faced some potential backlash for that.
Yeah, we certainly did. I mean, and when you talk about the backlash, that was something that occurred during the third session when we were dealing with redistricting. And El Paso did not fare well when it came to redistricting. We have had for over 30 years, five individuals from this community elected to serve in the state house. And this last year, this is coming to an end when new state representatives get sworn in January of next year. There are only going to be 4 members from El Paso. We lost what has been known as House District 76. It was actually, it was House District 76 was placed outside of Houston. It was literally moved outside of El Paso County, and it's now a new district outside of Houston. And what occurred was there was a district known as House District 74 that was it was currently part of the South Texas delegation district, and that district was extended into the northeast and into the northeast side of El Paso. So we are going to have 4 anchored representatives from El Paso, and we will have 1 new representative that's coming in from the lines of South Texas, and that's District 74. The current member who is representing District 74 is a man by the name of Eddie Morales. He's out of Maverick County, and he is seeking re-election to that seat. There is a Republican candidate that has filed for that seat for the legislature to serve. The way the district was drawn, it will be a competitive district, and by that I mean that it is potential that it's now potentially possible, likely, whatever word wants to be used, that there may be a public to that who will be representing El Paso in the legislature. but it's not going to be a person that, I certainly would have preferred if it was going to be a Republican member that it be somebody, a Republican from El Paso. We have had that in the past. We had a very good representative that was a member of the Republican Party, Pat Haggerty, for many, many years. We also had our former mayor, Dee Margo, who served in that position, but they were members, they were actually anchored, living, residing in our community, but that's not going to be happening at this point. So it'll be an interesting race come November of this year in terms of what happens with that seat. So for me, it was a great disappointment. And going back to your initial question, redistricting, do you want me to kind of explain what happened during the redistricting process?
Yeah.
Or maybe you could ask me questions. I tend to sometimes talk too much on what you ask. So I'll slow down and I'll let you ask me specific questions. And I'm happy to answer them.
You're doing perfectly. And that's exactly what I was going to ask about is with the redistricting maps, we saw that 95% of state growth was minority led. But when we look at the maps, it reduces historically minority majority districts within Texas.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Yeah, in the numbers that we were looking at and that we were given, Texas was the state that actually gained the most residents within the last 10 years. But that growth was exactly where you were pointing to. It was growth by the minority population. There's some very interesting data that resulted from the census, and that is now that the Hispanic population in the state of Texas is nearly as large as the non-Hispanic white population across the state. And when you take that into account, that it was people of color in the state of Texas that actually accounted for the state's population growth, when we were doing redistricting, it would have, out of those type of numbers and that type of factual data, you would have thought that the way the districts were drawn, for instance, on the congressional side, that we added two new congressional districts in the state of Texas because of the population growth. And since it was accounted for by minorities, you would have thought that the two new congressional districts in the state of Texas were going to be minority districts. That didn't happen. The two new congressional districts are actually non-minority districts. They were set up to where it would be very difficult for a minority to win those districts. And we also, aside from that, on the state side, because we were drawing lines for the U.S. House, we were drawing lines for the state Senate, the state House, and the State Board of Education. In drawing those lines, we actually, on the state House, we're under, and the way it was done is we're going to lose 3 Latino districts. We're going to lose 3 Black districts. We expect that Democrats are going to have a loss of at least 6 seats when we go back to the next legislative session. And currently, there are serving 83 Republicans and 67 Democrats. And so we expect that there's going to be less Democrats on the House floor. There has been lawsuits that have been filed. I strongly believe that there has been a violation of when it comes to voting rights. And it's there's two lawsuits that have been filed. One has actually been filed in El Paso. It was filed in the federal Western District of Texas. The judges that are hearing that lawsuit is it's actually a 3-judge panel. And one of the judges is a judge from El Paso, and that is Judge David Guadarrama. The other 2 judges are from other parts of the federal Western District. And they are, it's, these lawsuits take a long time. It's not something that's going to happen overnight. We, at this stage, we've got, we have a trial scheduled, I believe, in September of this year. Sometimes, since my background is as a lawyer, I'm very familiar with the fact that many times you get a trial date and it's postponed. So not certain if that's going to stand as the ultimate trial date, but there's going to be depositions that take place in between. There's already been some hearings. The second lawsuit that was filed was actually filed in Austin, and that lawsuit is really focusing. One of the major focuses is with regard to what happened in South Texas, and where there are certain rules when it comes to redistricting. And one of the rules is not to cross county lines unless it's absolutely necessary. And they crossed the county line twice in South Texas, because again, they were making changes that would wouldn't be favorable to Democrats, and obviously also to minorities. And so that one, there may be action that takes place. There's been hearings since it's been filed, but understand that there's not going to be resolution of litigation in time for actually when voting takes place this year. So there's not going to be changes in terms of the way, as far as we expect, the way district lines are going to be drawn. So going back, yeah, we lost House District 76 from El Paso. And so now we're looking at 4 people getting elected from this community to have representation in the state of Texas. I should here probably tell you that it's always helpful having as many state representatives as you do advocating for the needs of your community in Austin. I think that people are aware that because we are so far away from the state capital, that it makes it so much harder for people from our community to actually travel to Austin.
Right.
And it's so easy for people from Houston, Dallas, San Antonio, from the other major urban communities to go over there to talk to your senators, to talk to your state representatives on legislation that you're concerned about, on advocating for bills that you believe are good for your community. And so it was a benefit for us to have 5 House members, and we're losing 1. I mean, we're still somewhat clearly outnumbered. I mean, Houston has 20 state representatives. So you can kind of compare that to when we only have 5. And so if there's legislation that is something that Houston residents, Houston community is pushing for, you can see how you've got a better chance on being effective when you have those kind of numbers. In El Paso, it's I think that we've been this last sessions, we've been effective because we've tried as a delegation to stay united, because when you're united, you become more powerful. So we'll see what happens, but it is a huge disappointment. We were rushed into drawing the lines. There was not enough input from communities. There was very little notice in terms of what was going to happen. We had members from our community that actually testified during the redistricting committee hearing, because, and here I am, I'm probably talking to just kind of going on and on, but we had a problem because they wanted to take Fort Bliss and the airport away from our US representative district. And I mean, when you're talking about the airport, you're talking about Fort Bliss, you're dealing with huge economic drivers for El Paso. And when the map came out, it was drawn to where the airport and Fort Bliss were going to be taken away from our US rep district. There was people that testified at the redistricting hearing. I actually testified, which is kind of unusual. There was a few state reps that testified, and we also had several people from our community that were involved testifying, which was nice. They were able to do it online and give testimony as to why there would be a lot of harm if we lost Fort Bliss and we lost the airport. It was being proposed that a U.S. rep from Bexar County, from San Antonio, Gonzalez, was going to be taking over both of those areas in El Paso. And I think, I mean, it's pretty logical to make the jump that someone who lives here, who really knows El Paso, is going to be a better advocate when there are issues that concern those areas. And I mean, Fort Bliss is so important to El Paso. And it wasn't something that we were going to take lightly. So even though the bill that came out of the redistricting committee was doing that, there was changes that were made, and I think it was a group effort that led to that change, where airport came back to our US district, part of Fort Bliss. The important part, what I would say, in my opinion, the important part of Fort Bliss came back to our US House district. And I mean, we've got a congressional rep, Veronica Escobar, who I think has done an outstanding job for El Paso. And you know, obviously these lines, if they hold up, they're there for another 10 years, and we don't know how long our congresswoman is going to be serving. I hope she serves for a long time. But we want to make sure that we keep those important parts of the area in this community. And so that did happen. But we'll see what happens with the lawsuits. And it was not a good session, is all I can say.
I think it's pretty traumatic for a lot of us who look at the session and see all of these things that were passed. But one thing that I did want to touch with you on is your district has shifted with the redistricting. Your district absorbed what was once Representative Ordaz Pettis's district.
Well, it is, yeah, you're right. It took up some of her district, not all of it, because our our it's there was in the all of the districts, and so my district 77 ended up taking some of District 76. And then it also, part of that district, my understanding was it also went to what I believe is, and correct me if I'm wrong, I'm trying to remember, I think it's District 79, which is currently Art Fierro's district.
Yes, ma'am.
So part of District 76 came into 77, but then it also went to the other district, 79.
Right.
And so
this obviously caused some friction within the state delegation. And I know that a lot of concern was voiced on the fact that two women were going to have to potentially face off to win an election. Do you think that that was purposeful by the state legislature?
Well, there were several things that were pointed out when this happened. And going back to the quorum break, the fact that we left the state, we were in DC. I myself decided that I was not going to make quorum for the state house, because I knew that as soon as we had a quorum, that we were not, as Democrats, really, we weren't going to have any input or very little input when it came to the voting rights bill that was, or I shouldn't call it rights, the voting bill that had been filed on the state house. And so I knew that as soon as there was a quorum, that I was going to return, because I was going to fight the bill. But I wasn't going to make quorum in order to actually start debating. We had been told by federal lawmakers that the longer that we pushed our advocacy, the longer that we delayed the passage of a bill that we knew was eventually going to take place in Texas, would actually assist in the process of getting federal legislation on voting rights. And so with that type of comment that we heard in DC, it was not my intent to come back and make a quorum at the state house. So I stayed gone until quorum was actually reached in the state house. And Representative Ordaz Perez actually did the same thing. So when we returned to the House floor, we knew that there potentially could be ramifications for what we did. The other thing, and going back to what you said a little while ago, women as a whole are completely underrepresented at the state capitol. We've got, in comparison to the numbers, we've got 150, I'm a little bit hoarse. We have 150 House members, all right? And we have 31 senators. We make up 25% of the elected lawmakers. And when you think about the fact that in the state of Texas, their women are actually, or the population of women is a little greater than 50%. So we, as a female serving in the state house, we have a certain voice. The type of legislation sometimes that we propose, the type of legislation that we support, that we push is a little different. And I certainly believe that we are underrepresented, but not only represented as females, we're underrepresented in the state of Texas as Latinas. Minorities are underrepresented in the state of Texas, going back to what I discussed earlier, the fact that we're actually losing seats, Blacks as well as Latinos. It's so seeing that they were combining our seats certainly was not something, honestly, that I expected. I thought that we could and I worked with the map drawing process. I came up with maps where we could have a 5th seat anchored in El Paso, and that we would not have any member of our delegation to have to run against somebody else, a current serving state rep. And that could have happened. We could have had to where nobody was running against another incumbent. And we could have anchored that 5th seat in El Paso, but it didn't happen. And instead, it's real clear that there's only going to be 4 seats anchored in El Paso.
Right. And that's detrimental for El Paso in a lot of ways, because rather than, as you said, we're so far away, this is really the way that we get our funding. And I know that you sit on the transportation committee. So I'm sure that this is something I-10 is in terrible need of repair. And we always kind of get glanced by with I-35. So this is something that directly affects not just El Paso and the committee that you serve on, but it kind of just makes it to where El Paso has less of a voice, which being an 8-hour drive away from Austin and a flight away makes it all the more hard for El Pasoans to really engage. But what do you think that El Pasoans can do to make sure that their voices are heard in Austin?
Well, we did pass during the session where people can participate online for committee hearings, and whether or not that rule, because at the beginning of a session, we vote on changes or new house rules. And so it allowed participation at committee hearings online. And certainly if I go back to the Capitol, which I hope I do, I am running for re-election. That is that's going to be a rule that I want to keep, because that was a way that El Pasoans were able to participate at the committee hearings. And I would strongly tell people from our community, if they are concerned about a bill, to make sure that they testify online. If they're able to travel to the state capitol, you kind of like what you said. I mean, I've had to take that drive many times, and yeah, it takes you roughly about 8.5, 9 hours, depending on how long you stop to get there. So it's a long drive. Obviously, my preference would be for people to come live, to be there, because you have an opportunity to schedule meetings with representatives, with state senators, and having that open discussion and letting your feelings known as to how you feel about a piece of legislation is always important, because I can tell you for sure, I listen when people come and talk to me at the state capitol. I listen and I hear their concerns. We have thousands of bills filed. I think this past session, there was over 3,000 bills filed. And so it's impossible to know every single bill that is filed, and you pay attention to the bills that are filed in your committees. You pay attention to the bills that are really harmful. you pay attention to bills that are fantastic bills, and that you prepare in order to do what you can to get those bills passed. But you can't know about every single piece of legislation. And I know that there's advocates that have different interests in terms of what they're looking at. I mean, we have nurse practitioners, we have RNs, we have teachers, we've got firefighters, we have police officers, we've got so many different interested people in very specific areas that it is very helpful that they come and talk to us and they tell us what their concerns are, or they tell us the opposite. They really like this bill. They explain to us why it should get passed and become law, and how it helps our community. So it's something that I hope that more people get interested in doing and becoming that advocates. Because I have to tell you that the lobbyists in the state of Texas, they're strong forces, and there are a number of them, and it's good to hear from them. But I also I want to hear from constituents, and I want to expand that. I want to hear from anybody from El Paso that's concerned about any issues. So it's good to do that. The other thing, talking about what we should do, is voting. Because of those changes in the law, I think people have to go out there and vote. And I'm not advocating here, vote Democrat, vote Republican. I'm just saying you need to vote, because you need to support candidates that are in line with your viewpoints. And the state leadership looks at the number of people that are voting, and it makes a difference if we have a large number of people voting in our community. I mean, you get people, state candidates, coming and going to communities because they know that people are going to vote. And so we, as El Pasoans, I would say we have an obligation. Not only, obviously, we all have the right to vote if we are U.S. citizens and we're qualified, but we need to be exercising our right. So not only becoming vocal on issues important, but also making sure that we exercise our right to vote.
Well, and I know we're running out of time, and we're so appreciative of you working with us. But I just got an alert that the Supreme Court has blocked nationwide vaccine and testing mandates. The Supreme Court has just decided to vote against President Biden's vaccine mandate for companies with over 100 people. How do and El Paso, our numbers are rising rapidly with this new variant. We have, I believe yesterday it was announced that 10% of the sheriff's office was out with COVID, about 20% of police force. The city has gone back to working from home. How does this affect your district, and what do you think is going to happen statewide? Because Texas has some of the highest numbers of infection.
Well, I mean, it's disappointing to hear that, but honestly, it's not a surprise, and that's because all you have to do is look at the composition of the U.S. Supreme Court, and there was appointments that were made during the last leadership of a president, and so it's that's why, when I talk about litigation, you never know what's going to be happening. And in terms of losing that case, what I would say is people, regardless of whether you are required or not to get vaccinated, regardless of whether or not you're required to wear a face covering, it's something that people, what I would strongly recommend that they actually do, because that's the only way to stay safe. And going back to what you just said, El Paso does have one of the highest infection rates across the state. I was listening to NPR, and they were saying that El Paso and Beaumont, two extremes in the state of Texas, one far west, one far east, that we in our communities have the highest infection rate. I know that in El Paso, we're breaking numbers again with people getting hospitalized. And I am a strong believer that people need to get vaccinated, that people need to get the booster. And that's you're protecting yourself by doing that. And one of the things obviously that I'm very well aware of is that we do have a large number of people that are uninsured in this community. We have one of the highest number of uninsured. And so we have people that may have health issues that don't seek medical care and treatment because it's expensive. And people are more susceptible to having serious consequences if they get infected, if they're not in good health. And so we as a community, and I fully support our county judge, the mayor, we have to take measures to keep people safe. And that's one of the reasons that I'm here talking to you online rather than being there with you.
You are practicing what you preach.
That's exactly right. And so I am hoping that people actually do exactly what we're doing and to stay safe, because I know people that have passed away because of COVID. And I know people right now that have the infection. And I don't want our numbers to go up with regard to losses of lives in our community. That would be, devastating to continue on losing people.
I agree. And Representative Ortega, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a great chat, and we're so happy that we got to hear from you.
Thank you. All
Have
right.
a good. Thank you, everyone, for joining us, and we appreciate you viewing in. And we will be back on the 26th with Judge Ricardo Samaniego so that we can get an update from the county.
All right.
Thank you,
Bye.
Representative Ortega.
Thank you. Bye-bye.